one of the real joys of both hosting and presenting at the YDRU is the chance to hit cleanup. And I mean that as the sort of the baseball metaphor of hitting or presenting fourth, where with one swing, you have a chance to capitalize on all of the things that have been said in the three prior presentations. It's just such a real opportunity. My mind, even right now, has been thinking about over the past day or so, all of the little nuggets of insights that I think are very relevant to things that I want to talk about or invite a conversation about. They're still sort of swirling around in my mind. It's kind of neat how much overlap and sort of connective tissue there is from the things that have been said so far today. So I want to talk today about youth contribution, and to do so, I want to offer a quick disclaimer, is that my sort of core area of research interest is on the area of youth purpose. Dr. Quinn mentioned this yesterday, that I spend a lot of my time, my scholarship focuses on youth purpose. And so why am I talking about contribution today? I do think that there's important linkages between purpose and contribution, and I'll speak to some of those today. But more than anything else, it is that I am interested in translation, and I'm a champion of positive youth development. And I think it's just important when we find concepts in a research literature that we think are relevant to positive experiences for young people, that we do our job to help practitioners who are working and serving and supporting young people to really understand what we mean and what we're finding in around these concepts. Likewise, it's really important for researchers to know about the good work that's happening in the field, so that we don't just spin off and ask questions just amongst ourselves as researchers, but that we're guiding questions to be responsive to things that people really want to know about. And I've seen a lot of that happen today in the chat and conversation today. So in the past day or so. So that's what I hope to do, is sort of extend and broaden a circle of community thinking about these things, and doing so in the context of the YDRU is a real opportunity. So just wanted to make sure that I say that up front. To jump into things, I want to share my acknowledgements up front. I have been accused of making my way through an entire talk without having thanked anybody. So I'm gonna nip this in the bud, and I'm gonna start today by acknowledging the host of organizations and individuals who are essentially gonna show up today in my remarks. I only have slides and remarks today because so many people over the past couple of years have really poured into this, either through funding or in-kind services. And then the names on the right, many of whom are in the room today, are individuals who've been collaborators on much of this work, and at least the thought exercise of this idea of contribution and what to make of it over the past couple of years. And I've really enjoyed working with all the individuals. So if your name's on the screen, thank you. If it's not, I apologize, and it will be, I'm sure, afterwards when I receive the hate mail and hate texts. I will make sure that it's up there going forward. So thank you all for everything you contributed to this work. So I'm going to lay out here a little bit of a table of contents, sort of an agenda that may be a bit ambitious, but really where all of this is going is I really want to motivate a conversation. And I don't mean that rhetorically. I really have slides that have active questions that I and others are looking for dialogue and discussion about. And it's going to be really awkward when I get to this point if I ask a question and there's just silence. So please, by all means, prepare to engage in a conversation. I have slides dedicated to help us have that conversation as we go through. And I'll get there by talking about the science of contribution, and I'll try to do that by trying to convince you that there is one. We can talk about some of the definitions and what are the early sort of empirical returns on what does research literature look like in the area of contribution, particularly as it relates to youth. I'll talk about things we still don't know much about. And then it's there that I'll try to introduce a really sort of ongoing active research space for us, talking about the Contribution Project. Not many people have heard us talk about the Contribution Project. It's certainly not the study and the data that we're collecting around the Contribution Project, but this just seems like the right community and context in which we can share some of this to try to invite a broader conversation about what's possible when we think about youth contribution. Okay, so with that being said, I'll jump into things. It's probably fair to introduce any concept to ask, what are we talking about? Try to lay it out here. And I think some concepts like play, maybe like purpose, maybe contribution are easier starting points when we think about the research literature, because we use these terms in our everyday parlance, right? We have some understanding of what these are because we probably use them over the course of the week or a month, to be sure, in our everyday lives. And so it's not so mysterious that when we think about contribution, particularly youth contribution, we might think of the kinds of things that young people get involved with, and especially those things that are helpful for adults. So when we think about youth contribution, what emerges is sort of a glimpse into adult desires and roles that we ask young people to participate in or get invited into. So helping with meal prep or cleanup or activities like mowing the lawn or lawn care, things like that, that we ask young people to contribute to the things that we as adults would like help doing. And I think that's a fair place. I think that's not a wrong way of thinking about contribution, to be sure. But if we give it just a beat, I think we also might deepen or expand our sense of what also counts as contribution. Even when adults may not be present, we know that young people are contributing to each other in the forms of organized sports or musical groups or clubs that they're a part of. Even if there's no adult present, they may see that they're playing a contributing role in a larger team. Even if it's not well organized, we know that young people are contributing to the health and well-being of each other, offering a kind word or lifting up a peer, saying something that they think is making a contribution in the lives of somebody that they care about. And I also think it's fair to acknowledge that in today's climate, young people are contributing to, even when adults are present, and not this sort of hierarchical way, but actually in ways that young people are leading the conversation, right? They're contributing to, think of it, digital or tech spaces. They're really introducing an understanding or sharing an insight that the adults that they're around may not have known. So it's not just an adult inviting them into the space. It could be a young person leading the way, or playing a very different role and contributing in the decision-making capacity. I have an adolescent in my life. My son is 16. I can think several times in which he's contributing to shaping the things we're talking about or the things we're deciding to do as a family. So contribution can quickly become more intricate and complex if we really spend time thinking about it a little bit. But what then is contribution to researchers, right? How have researchers and scientists sort of tackled this idea of contribution? What does it look like in this space? Well, one name you might want to be familiar with is Andrew Fellini, who for the past 15 or 20 years has sort of aimed his program of research at contribution. And he would define purpose as, or a contribution as referring to providing supports, resources, or helping achieve a shared goal. And I think that definition is worthwhile because it maybe underscores this sort of Latin prefix of con or con, of working together towards something. That contribution invokes this idea of doing something for or with on behalf of others. It doesn't have to just be this individual thing in the mind of a young person. It can actually be something they're doing that conjures an idea or partnership with other people. And I want to go a bit further here is when you actually look at the research literature on contribution, you see a bit of a bifurcation. That you can sort of see a hair being split here. Is contribution can mean a couple of things at least. It could refer to sort of an ideology, sort of the motivations, the attitudes or feelings or desires that young people have to contribute, right? They could have this sense of wanting to contribute. Or we could look at contribution as a behavior, a set of actions or activities that young people are actually like the what they're contributing. I find this to be an important and maybe even familiar sort of bifurcation because it resembles what we see in the purpose literature, right? When we think about youth purpose, we oftentimes think about the what. What are youth contributing, right? And so we expect them to sort of fill in the blank with what is the activity that you're doing or what is your sense of purpose, right? Well, we also know that sense of purpose matters. So independent of the what is to what degree do you feel that? That same bifurcation exists in the contribution space that we might want to think about this because some young people want to contribute, even if they aren't doing so at the moment. Other young people might be contributing because they've been invited into or forced to contribute in ways, but that doesn't mean that they want to. So I think by having both of these things in mind at the same time, sort of the feelings about contribution, and then the actions of contribution, we might start to move our way to sort of a more optimal view. The contribution might be optimized when we think both about the things young people want to contribute and are given opportunities to actually go out and do or enact those kinds of things. And I think it's also fair to remind ourselves that contribution has been sort of floating around the youth development research for forever. Because we know that scholars like Rich Lerner and folks, I know people might be familiar with the scholarship of Rich Lerner and his team, have talked about contribution as sort of a form of thriving. right? That we're familiar with the 5 C's, right? That we think we want to develop programs and early life experiences for young people that develop the 5 C's, things like character and connection and competence and confidence and caring, right? That if we devise programs carefully, experiences thoughtfully, that we might give rise to the 5 C's. And if we do that, there may be an emergent 6th C, which is contribution. And that would be a real indicator that a young person has become a thriving member of society, that they're able to contribute to the world around them. And so in that way, contribution has been in the youth development literature, but almost as an outcome, that if we get everything right, contribution might be sort of a detectable signal that, okay, if that person's able to contribute as a young adult or in midlife, that means that they received in some adequate amount the 5 C's that kind of get them to this point. Okay, but here's where things get interesting in my humble opinion, because what if contribution is more than an outcome, right? It's not something that we're just waiting on. We do everything right when you're young, and then we look to see later on, are you a contributing member of society? There's an argument, a relatively recent argument that's floating around the research literature now about asking what if contribution is actually a need that comes earlier in the life course? Right, and this is an argument put forth by Andrew Fellini. There's the citations of the article there. And I'm gonna, if you're not looking at the abstract or are unfamiliar with this article, I'm gonna sort of distill 2 sort of ideas that are worth thinking about here about contribution that you would extract by reading the article. The first is that what if contribution is a need not unlike things that we already know are sort of core developmental tasks of adolescence or in youth development, things like identity or autonomy or intimacy. So nobody really questions anymore that these things aren't just kind of nice to have. They're very important to be working on, to have experience and grappling with these questions as we're young, so that we arrive in adulthood or midlife having cultivated a sense of who we are, our identity, having sought more autonomy or practiced intimate relations or connections with other people. You really would not want to arrive in midlife without having ever thought about who you are or thought about who you are alone from others, right? Or your intimate connections with others. So what if contribution could be placed on a list alongside those kind of core needs? Right, then that sort of changes the game a little bit. It's not something we're waiting as an outcome. It's something that could actually be a developmental task of adolescence. Also, we know that there's a rich literature suggesting that contribution corresponds with a whole host of wonderful things, like indicators of health and well-being. So as a need, if we are not providing youth opportunities to contribute, we may actually be co-conspirators in some of the ill-being that we're seeing in the lives of young people. And I'll say more about what are the correlates of health and well-being as we go forward here, but we know that pro-social opportunities or giving, volunteering, sharing with others corresponds with a constellation of indicators of health and well-being. So if it's a need, and we're not really squarely talking about it as a need in adolescence, we may actually be preventing sort of the healthier profile of young people. So these are the core 2 arguments he's making in this paper, but there's sort of real consequences of this argument that I also want to share. And they are that, get this here, is that by more squarely considering contribution in the lives of young people, it may give us a chance to enhance the sort of biological reductionistic view of adolescence as just these risky brains and risky bodies. It may invite us to really rethink what we're talking about here is that the biological architecture, the neurological architecture of adolescence may not just be a risky brain and a risky body, it's like it's a problem period of the lifespan. It could actually be a developmental period of extreme opportunity, of rich learning. And we've heard this time and time again from the previous speakers that we've had over the past day or so, talking about this is what if you sort of think about this time as not just sort of a nicety, right? But it's actually a necessity, that the same things that we're sort of judging negatively or harshly in adolescence or early life could actually be opportunities for learning, of exploration. If we only could scaffold them toward these things, we might have a more positive understanding of what's going on in the biological sort of neurological architecture of young people. The second sort of implication of this is that if we really think about adolescence as a time in which contribution is a need for them, well, we may be missing out as a society or a collection of communities in what contributions those young people might make. In other words, it's almost like we are not inviting everybody to the party, right? If you can't contribute or we don't provide many opportunities to contribute, then the problems we see in the world or the positive things that we want to further amplify, we aren't inviting everybody who might push in those directions to the party. We're sort of leaving it to just a few, select few to make contributions. So this is the claim, right? This is the theoretical claim, is an invitation to think, what if contribution is more serious and vital in the lives of young people than we've made it? Okay, now we know if we think about this argument, we pull the thread through a little bit, there's several domains of youth experiences, the ones that have shown up time and time again in our presentations so far, that we might explore this. The one that we oftentimes might skip past are the self-contributions, right? If contributions about other people, well, what about the contributions young people might make to themselves? To sort of invite us into thinking about where contribution might show up. Well, one place may be in the lives of youth themselves, about the contributions they make to their own experiences. We know youth sign up, in fact, sign up kind of in droves to self-driven learning opportunities, right? We think of, what do you want to learn? When they get a chance to be in the driver's seat of their learning and the programs that support that, youth want to participate in those experiences. They contribute to their own health and well-being in terms of making healthy choices of what they eat, because they're thinking about what the ramifications of that for their own experiences. The jobs and monetary gain that they may experience if they work, and the money that they can get to pay for their own experiences. And the rest of these are sort of tried and true context for contributions. We know young people are contributing to their family and their household experiences, to chores, decision making, and sort of sometimes the jobs that they have get turned more to the collective. They share their earnings or their profits with family members, right? They make contributions to the family. Oftentimes. Other times, we know youth contribute to their peers, both emotional, instrumental supports. They give them peers rides to various places they want to go. They offer their ideas, or they sign up for leadership roles in organizations. I want to contribute to what we're doing as a team leadership group, and I want to play a role where I think I could play a meaningful leadership role. And we know that youth contribute in community spaces when they're invited or created scaffolded opportunities to participate in service learning, or to get involved with activism or organizational planning. Folks in this room who are familiar with YPAR, right, participatory action research, that whole model is based upon the idea that youth have a perspective. And when opportunities are provided to share and to delve into that space, you can ask, well, what do they want to know about their world? And what contributions would they want to make once they're holding that information in hand? Okay, so again, the idea of contribution is not completely out of the realm of how we typically think about young people, but it really gives us a chance to expand our idea about where does contribution show up in the lives of young people.
Tony, let me interrupt for 1 second. Sorry.
Please.
A couple of folks are wondering, your slides aren't showing anymore. It hasn't been long.
Oh, no.
I think that was by accident. I wasn't sure if you were transitioning to more of a conversation or not, but I think they just disappeared.
No, they were. Let me move to the slide here. I was on. So I'm so sorry about that.
No. Thanks. Sorry to
are they visible now?
Yep.
Okay. Just know I was showing the best slide, like award-winning slides, and I won't go back to them now, but they are available on the PDF if you want to go back and get them. My remarks were generally in line with what I was showing here, so if you didn't see them, my apologies. Hopefully they show up now. I was then moving into a place like why we should care about this. Well, we know that opportunities to contribute, and when people enact contribution, they donate, they give of resources, they volunteer, those enactments and those desires, people who aren't enacting it, but just want to, correspond with some really wonderful indicators, including things like longevity. People who are giving of their time or participate in volunteering activities actually live longer. They experience greater physical health, emotional or psychological well-being. They tend to report lower levels of depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms. And of course, those who are more likely to contribute or want to contribute also report greater levels of purpose in life. And just to kind of be a little recursive here, these kinds of correlates are in fact the sort of the tapestry of correlates that we see in the purpose literature. And we know that these things are related, that individuals who feel purposeful also feel more generative or want to contribute. And so there's almost this like canopy idea that purposeful individuals tend to be contributing individuals. And what corresponds with those things are sort of a whole host of wonderful indicators of health and well-being. So let alone the contributions that are actually made. When you are contributing, you may be doing something in the service of others. And you can think of that as itself a bundle of benefits for a people or a community or a family. But to the contributor themselves, the consequences might really matter in terms of the health, the physical health and emotional health of those individuals, and including not only how long you live. And so we oftentimes forget about that the giver or the contributor may experience their own, there may be reasons to do this for their own sake, in addition to what the communities or the beneficiaries of those contributions may actually earn or get from that. Okay, so I want to say one piece here, because this has come up in our remarks and in prior presentations. I won't delve deeply into neuroscience here, but simply to say, we do have a tendency, we as adults have a tendency to sort of think and narrate around youth experiences like adolescence is a really risky period of the lifespan. And we do so because we sort of focus on the brain changes that are taking place in adolescence. And on one hand, the neuroscience of adolescence has been fascinating and important, because it's been a way of even talking about adolescence and not just thinking of adolescence as just junior adults or little people, but actually as a collection of people who are having a fundamentally different kind of experience as they're becoming or moving toward adulthood. But at the same time, I think we've sort of pulled the pendulum a bit too far, where we sort of reduce adolescence to just this risky period of the lifespan. And kind of like, just survive adolescence and then you'll be better off. And we talk about risky brains because we know that the social reward centers, the social reward networks and circuitry of the brains, the sort of sublimbic system of adolescence is ready to go. Adolescents are keenly aware of inclusion, of positive feedback, of wanting the thumbs up and the hearts on social media. That feels really good to adolescents. By the way, it feels really good to us as adults too. What we might enjoy as adults, though, is a better, more strongly connected network with prefrontal cortex regions where we can think about downstream consequences and planning. So yes, it feels good to all of us to be included, but we might think we're not going to be included at all costs, right? It's not everything. I'm not going to risk everything for that thumbs up or that heart on social media, because I can think about some bad things that might happen too. Young people may take a little bit longer to get there, to integrate those things. But why I want to share this is that there's some really interesting work in the neuroscience space. This is a work by Ava Telzer and colleagues in which they put young people, adolescents, in a scanner so they could watch their brains or watch blood flow in brains as young people were engaged in a monetary task. So young people were being flooded with these sort of monetary questions and told, you can earn up to $100 in this study for you, and you can earn up to $100 for your family. So think about you and your family, sort of two different reward beneficiaries. You can earn $100 and your family can earn $100 based upon the decisions that you make. And there's a series of trials that young people would run through. And some of the trials are like, would you like to have $4 for you and your family doesn't earn anything in this trial? Would you say yes to that? And there's other trials where it's like your family could earn $5, but it's going to come at a cost to you. And you could think of a series of these trials over time. Over time, you don't trying to keep track of how much you've earned, how much your family has earned over time. As you might imagine, in these sort of monetary tasks, young people over the trials earn more money for themselves than they do their family. They're pretty quick at saying, when you can earn money, it doesn't cost your family anything, you can sort of maximize how much money you're going to make. But what gets really interesting are those trials when you could actually donate money to your family, but it comes at a cost to you. Right. And it's in these trials, what we see is that young people who we know through self-report and by actually looking at their actions are more family identified or get more fulfillment by assisting in their families in some ways. They're showing much more activities in these exact same brain regions that we think make them vulnerable to social risk or peer susceptibility or peer pressure. So in other words, this risky brain that we talk about in adolescence is the same circuitry that we see as young people are thinking about donating to their family. And so young people who opt to give money to their family, even when it comes at a cost to them, is the same circuitry. So rather than thinking just about adolescent brains as risky brains, they're brains that are attending to social circumstances and social opportunities. So it's a context for learning. Adolescence is a rich context for exploration and considering different opportunities and learning. And so with the right environmental scaffolding, it's not that we want brains to be any different than they are. We may just want to show up and put young people in environments where they're not going to be less hurtful to themselves or others, but create opportunities where they can think about other people. And when they do that, they're using the same brain that we oftentimes admonish in the literature. Okay. Can I take a check in? Am my slides still being shared? Okay, so when people enter the room, I get the admit button, and I don't know what to do here. So one quick note I want to say before I go on is simply that we should acknowledge that there are barriers also to contribution. You can romanticize this idea of contribution, but not all youth have equal opportunity or access to even being able to contribute, or when they do, it may not show up and mean the same thing to them. There's variability in the accessibility of opportunities or resources that young people have, and the variability in scarcity of choice to contribute. And just gonna go around the horn here, we know that there's some just pretty explicit discrimination or marginalization forcing functions in the lives of young people. We know that over the course of adolescence, you have to become of age before you can contribute to sort of the true voting behaviors of contribution, to really contribute to the policies that may enact your own life, right? Or how much you're taxed. You have to turn 18 before you can even contribute in those things. So we have stratified who can contribute in our society based upon age in very, very important ways, in critical ways. Sometimes youth are invited to contribute, but their ideas are ultimately adjudicated by the adults in the room, right? Other times you have to have credentials to even begin to contribute, right? So we say, well, people who have earned this particular GPA, they can take a course and they have an opportunity to spend or allocate money or to allocate resources in a way. And so if contribution is a need, we should think about how much all youth actually have opportunities to practice or exercise that need, and not assume that contribution is just out in the world and if only young people would just contribute, right? Our role as adults might be to be thoughtful, or more thoughtful than we've been, about opportunities to sort of minimize existing barriers or remove barriers for youth to contribute if we want the benefits to go along with them for all youth. There are many things that are still unknown in this space. I just want to name a few because I suspect maybe the wonderings that folks might have. So we know that there's contribution ideologies, desires, and behaviors. Well, what turns a desire into a behavior? At what point, what are the mechanisms that say, I would like to contribute? Well, what's stopping you from actually doing it? That's a really sort of open area in this literature. Where does a desire or sense of contribution become a contribution act? How does contribution substance, or the what young people are doing, correspond with the benefits they derive? Can you make any contribution and experience greater physical health or well-being, or are there certain kinds of contributions more likely to do that? Do youth contributions have real visible impact? So we can invite young people to do things in the world, but do the beneficiaries of those things actually notice, yeah, that was just as helpful as if an adult were to do that same thing? So are the contributions young people are doing visible to the world in the ways that we would hope that they are? And one that's going to motivate sort of our next sort of leg here is, does contribution actually give rise to a greater sense of purpose? We know that these things correspond, right? They're related, that people who feel a sense of purpose tend to feel a sense of contribution. But do these things sort of interact or engage with one another in a little bit more of a dynamic way, sort of in the moments when you're contributing? Does it correspond with a greater sense of purpose? Is a question we might ask. And that's a question that sort of motivates this project I want to share with you about. So what I want to share with you now is just this project that I, in the context of some colleagues that are here in the room, have constructed this idea we call the Contribution Project. I want to share with you a little bit about this project and some early returns on what we think we're learning about this, and then invite a conversation with you about what you make of this project. And where I'm going with this, not to bury the lead, is your potential interest in this project or a project like this. Okay. So I should first acknowledge the team of folks who've conspired to put together this idea of the Contribution Project. For me, this has been a highlight of my past couple of years, is getting to work with undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs, staff in Pride in the Bronfenbrenner Center, and faculty who I had not always connected with in my own area of research on purpose in life. But contribution has been this, as I mentioned, this sort of canopy concept that has brought together a unique configuration of people who find it interesting enough to hang out and start to think our way through what might we do around this concept for people and try to create an opportunity for the contribution project. So there's a little bit of a shout out to sort of the research intersections with administrative and sort of communication intersections around this contribution project. What we did is we built this idea of the contribution project this way. A couple of years back, we allocated some resources, some funding that we had, and said, well, how can we engage students on campus with the idea of contribution? And we did so by asking a very simple, at least in our view, question on a website this way. We asked, what is a contribution that you'd like to make? It was a question with an open-ended response opportunity. Can you articulate in like 1,500 characters or less, a contribution that you'd like to make? It was truly marketed to every undergraduate at Cornell University. And if they could respond to this question, they were put into the running to be selected to support their contribution. We were going to give them $400 to support their pursuit of this contribution. Now, we didn't leave it exactly there. We asked just a handful of other questions that we wanted to get a bit more context. So if you're serious about this, if there's a contribution you'd like to make, how would $400 help you? What is your role in this? Would you just donate the money? Would you lead a project? Would you start a project? Kind of, what is your role with this project? You have this contribution idea, and how much progress would you make by the end of this term? Kind of, where would you be if we were to check in with you at the end of this year? So this wasn't, in our minds, a heavy lift. We just wanted to know, do you have something you would like to contribute? And if you do, can you tell us a little bit about it? And we're not going to adjudicate the substance, the aspirational content. Our job is not to vet, well, that doesn't count as a contribution or this doesn't count. If you can give us a response, and as long as it's not intended to hurt you or somebody else, you're going to be in the running, and we're going to select at random a number of people to receive this $400 to pursue this contribution. Our first time through, we selected 50 people, and now for the past couple of years, we selected 100 people to support in this way. Now, the one other nuance here is that in addition to this contribution project, we've invited all contributors to a survey. They don't have to participate in this, but we wanted to learn a little bit about their experiences. And so we asked people to fill out a pre-survey, a post-survey, and then a diary survey. So over the course of the first 30 days of working on your contribution, we wanted to learn a little bit about their experiences. And that's what I want to share with you a little bit about what we were learning about this, at least in a preliminary way. Okay. What you're looking at here are our most recent set of contributors. We asked them to submit a photo or an image that represents their project idea. That odd symbol on the right is a QR code that takes you to the full list of the contributors of the past year. I implore you to check out in their words what their contributions were. There's a collection of really neat ideas here. Again, we did not invite a certain kind of contribution. This isn't a contribution project that does one thing but not others. This is the full gamut of contributors and what people were actually doing here. And that QR code will take you to the list, and you can see what folks have done this most recent year and in years past on that website. A little bit of the lay of the land here. You may or may not find all this interesting, but I want you to know why we find this interesting, is that we set up this platform and asked, can you think of a contribution? And what you're seeing here are the number, sort of the return on our inquiry, how many people we've actually gotten. Now, this may not seem like a lot, but we got 260 people to apply for this contribution project idea over the past 2 years. I'm now just focusing on the past 2 years. Why that's a compelling number to us is that this website is only open for three weeks at a time. So in a given year, students are invited to apply for the contribution project for a 3-week window. It is not left open for the full year. So you don't know during that time how many people you're going to get, but 260 people have applied, had a contribution idea in a 6-week total window over the past 2 years that they could have applied for this. To me, this is fascinating because it sort of comports with this idea that young people would like to contribute. But for this opportunity, we wouldn't have known that 260 people wanted to make a contribution. We would have just not known that information. The contributors come from all of the colleges at Cornell. That's a compelling thing because this opportunity doesn't seem to be sort of shoved in sort of a niche corner of our university. And we have over 50 discrete majors. I think there's 81 or 82 official recognized majors at Cornell, and we have 50 of them represented in the contribution project. It's not just an engineering thing or a humanities thing. It's a lot of different disciplines and backgrounds. You can see we do a better job of getting folks to upperclassmen than first year students, but we have representation from across the 4 years here at Cornell. I won't delve into this. As you read the contribution ideas, you might find things that you find more compelling or less compelling. We all have our fan favorites, things that contributions that we think are really neat. I would just say a couple of ones I find really interesting. There was a group that they used the $400 to modify stuffed animals. This is a team of students who modify stuffed animals that wiggle or jiggle or do a dance for young people, for children that have a range of motor capacities that they may not be able to squeeze the ear or push the paw. So they modify them to be usable and accessible to students no matter their motor capacities. If they can step on it, if they can press up against it, they can still get the stuffed animal to do something. There's another student this year who planted trees on campus, fruit producing trees on campus. I didn't even know that was legal, but this student worked with facilities, they worked with groundskeeping to literally plant new trees on campus. You can find them on the slope. You can go by with a QR code and learn about what trees those are, that over time will literally produce fruit that students can pick and eat. This student worked with a horticulture professor to learn what would survive here on campus, what wouldn't compete with the other nearby trees. And so there was a little bit of a research effort involved with that one as well. And then another really compelling project was a student who noticed that on campus there's Braille signage that is just 2D, two-dimensional. It's just printed on a sheet of paper. So it's not really serving the purpose as you might think. And so this student's going around working with facilities to find places where they can actually install a tactile Braille signage so people can actually fully access Braille signage. There's a couple of notes about these contributions on the side. I just want to end with one is there's a lot of engineering projects and sustainability projects, but what's really remarkable is the number of contribution projects that invite contributors to do some amount of research first. They need to know something about, learn something about the world before they enact contribution. It's even though their contribution is about A or B, they say, I first needed to do this thing over here. I need to learn something. And so there's a research component, even though it's not required, there's kind of a research component to a lot of these contributions that they go do. Okay, so while contributors are out in the world doing their thing, for the first 30 days of that contribution exercise, we administered a daily diary survey. And in it, we asked questions, the contributions that people were making. We asked about, did you work on your contribution today? How did it go? You know, how motivated were you to work on your contribution? We also asked questions about well-being. So how did you feel today? How positive or negative did you feel? How strongly, how purposeful did you feel today? And then we asked questions about the sort of the administrative component. How much money have you spent on your contribution so far? And did you do any new contributions? So we're supporting you for the thing that you applied for, but did you make any additional contributions today? We wanted to know that as well. So just a few sort of descriptive things that I think will motivate a broader conversation here. You may or may not be interested in all of this, but I find some of this kind of interesting. So out of the contributors who participated in our research project, we have a total of about 1,200 observed days. So across all of them, we know every day we ask, did you work on your contribution? And most days are not contribution days. I have to admit that surprised me a bit. You are applying and you are being supported to make a contribution. I thought every day you would go out and be working on your contribution. That's not true. About 2/3 of the days are not contribution days. In fact, over the course of the first 30, only the average person worked on the contribution about 5 of them. Right, so this isn't like a life-changing thing where all of your time is now spent to contributions. It's something that they wanted to do, and they spend about, on average, about 5 days doing it. On average, it's about 4 days working on new contributions. And over the course of the past 2 years, there's been a total of about 365 new contributions. Why that's interesting is, remember, we have funded 200 contributors. We've given 200 people $400 each to make a contribution. But the return on that investment is an additional 365 contributions. I think that's a really interesting thing, that they're being supported to make a particular contribution, but over the course of doing that, there's new things that are emerging for them that they want to do. So we're kind of getting more bang for our buck in terms of this investment, if you believe in the power of contribution. Okay. So what does it matter that folks are out in the world making contributions? Well, One place it doesn't seem to matter is in terms of what we think of as subjective well-being or happiness, right? So happiness might be indicated by high levels of pleasure, positive affect, life satisfaction, and low levels of negative affect. Days on which students are working on their contribution do not look different than days that they're not working on them in terms of this subjective profile. So they don't necessarily feel more pleasure on those days they're working on them. I think, working on a contribution may not be easy. Sometimes you just a lot of effort you got to expend. You got to go plant trees or go do things. So it's not easy or necessarily fun or pleasurable. But what it might be is purposeful. Our early preliminary data suggests that days on which students are working on their contribution are experienced as more purposeful. So not to get into the weeds, but the pleasure might be thought of sort of a hedonic well-being, sort of it feels good. Whereas pleasure might be a form of eudaimonic well-being. It's sort of like it's doing good in the world. And contributing is felt as sort of doing good in the world if you sort of follow that understanding of purpose as a form of eudaimonic well-being. And so we know that purpose is worth having, a sense of purpose is worth having. And it seems to be the case that working on a contribution that you wanted to do and were supported to do corresponds with a greater level of sense of purpose in life. Now, I want to just take a moment to say why that is important is because over the course of the study, the more purposeful people felt on a given day, they tended to have higher levels of self-esteem and higher levels of life satisfaction, things that we really want young people to have, the kinds of things that may push back against the narrative of youth sort of being in a mental health crisis, is we want people to feel good about themselves and feel good about the things they're doing in the world. And the more purposeful people felt, it tended to correspond with these other indicators of self-esteem and life satisfaction. And by the way, things like positive affect. So I might not be able to help support a contribution that makes you feel good in the moment, but it could give rise to the resources that do contribute to feeling good about yourself and the things that you're doing. So it's sort of a mechanistic way of thinking about helping youth feel better, maybe by supporting the contributions that they wanna actually make. All right, one last piece here is just, I think it's important to acknowledge, I do not view this as a story of the haves versus have-nots. That we know that feeling purpose is really good for people and making contributions is really good for people. But what's interesting is here's just two exemplars. I'm just picking two individuals who we followed for 30 days and showing you them to you here. And the way of thinking about these two individuals are the top person in the darker blue here is on the y-axis is sense of purpose. Over their 30 days, on average, out of 0, not very purposeful, 100, very purposeful, this person on average over the past month said they have a 66. So their average level of purpose was a 66, which is noticeably higher than the person on the bottom in yellow who had a 26 on average. So in a lot of my work, I would say, gosh, that top person, they're going to fare better in life because they have a stronger or higher level of purpose in life. But what these data suggest is as you track these individuals, the asterisks correspond to days they were working on their contribution. So it's not a perfect story, but the quick take-home message is that for the most part, contribution days are at or above the midpoint for that individual in terms of their felt sense of purpose. So it's not like you have to walk around with this dispositional sense of purpose to get the benefits potentially of contributing. This for us is a segue into the next kind of experimental lab studies that we might want to do, and the next questions we might ask in the contribution project. What about people who applied to make these contributions, to do a contribution, but they were not selected? Or days, what happens as you look over time? If they're only working on this on average about 5 days over time, what happens at the end of the month as you go forward? If contribution days are showing up as kind of purposeful days, what can we do to create more contribution days is what gives rise to this. Okay. So here's the promised land is a conversation I would like to have with you. And to not bury the lead, it is a conversation in which we have a wondering about what would it look like to construct the next contribution project. We really enjoy doing this. We have a team of folks who are really thoughtful. We meet weekly to talk about the contribution project, but we've been doing it routinely on a college campus. What would it look like to envision and construct and hopefully co-construct a contribution project that is focused on young people? And so I'm just going to lay out a series of questions here because there's some things on the screen that are blocking everything for me. So rather than doing this one by one, I'm just going to throw up some questions here. And as they pop up, I'll say a little bit about them. So in the chat, please, let's engage. And then when I put them all up here, I will reduce the screen so I can just look, we can look at each other and we can talk a little bit about these. But here are the questions that we want to throw out. I do wonder, what kinds of supports would youth need in order to contribute? We sort of lower the bar, is what would you like to contribute? And $400, we believe, kind of suffices to get people squared away, making and working on their contributions. But what supports might younger people need to be able to contribute in the ways that they want? I'm curious what people think would be necessary in terms of needs and scaffolded supports. What might contribution look like in the context of your organization? So some of you I know support lead organizations where contribution is an explicit exercise. You support youth contributions. Others of you might think about that. Like, what might it look like if you were to engage youth that you support with this question? What kinds of contributions do you suspect young people would want to enact or start enacting? So what is the shape of contribution in the lives of the young people that you support, that you work with? Would be a wonderful question and conversation. Are there boundaries by which contributions might be judged negatively or denied? We go back and forth a lot as a team because we get contributions that lead to a lot of laughter on our team, and then some really sometimes serious questions like, is that a real contribution? And we pulled the pendulum to say, if it is a contribution in the mind of the individual who's articulating it, then we want to support it. But that need not be where we all are as we think about youth contribution. So are there certain things that you would say that doesn't count as a contribution? And what are those things? I guess to get to the heart of the matter is, could a contribution project work within the context of your organization? And what would be necessary for that to happen? If we said we would like to partner with you in thinking our way through a contribution project, would that work at all within the confines and parameters of what you do as an organization or you do as a leader in your organization? And then if not, what is the distance between right now and what would be required to get there? What would be helpful as resources or supports? And then the final question, of course, is what does partnership look like? Is there any interest at all in thinking about this contribution project as I've laid it out, or as it might be maneuvered? Is there any interest in working together and co-constructing a contribution project with our team and your team? And that's sort of the question. So I can't see in this shape everything that's in the chat or might be. I'm just going to move to one final slide, and it's just an opportunity to say thank you. There's my email address, and please do write me if I've said something that needs greater clarification or you want to continue talking, please do so. But I want to return or open up space to return to the conversation points that are real here for us. So let me just minimize this and stop sharing and see if people want to engage. And this would be a great time. These are not rhetorical questions. I hope we can just spend them a few minutes talking about any of these questions and seeing where you are with this.
There's a lot of good insight already in the okay. Chat here. And I wonder if you want to remind us of some of the questions, just directions you might want this to go in. But people did start with what are the supports that would be needed? And so some are really practical, like transportation, how to help young people actually access the spaces they want to contribute to. Folks are definitely raising kind of mentors and the supportive adults around young people to help them figure out strategies, non-judgmental spaces to share their dreams. That's really beautiful. And some folks even have some specific ideas about the sorts of activities that might come up. So like being mentors for after schooling. So the idea that young people might want to work directly with younger folks. More things about
that's a great idea.
Here.
That's a great idea. And I'd be curious. I'm sure this differs a little bit based upon how different organizations are situated, but if it does seem that some kind of mentorship role is vital or helpful in this context of rather than just youth out in the world, but having access to an adult or peer that's sort of helping guide or serving as a champion to the contributions. And I wonder what that might look like as sort of a peer or the contributions themselves could be done as peer teams. I wonder if there would be an interest in that as well. And I just want to know, Chris, thank you for that summary, Chris. I'm kind of looking through these now. I saw a note here. I totally agree that it would be really helpful to get our mind around the resources, like to really talk honestly about what kinds of resources would be helpful, without naming dollar amounts. I think we know that you could be so low, it doesn't really empower youth to go do the things they want to do. And I also think you could overshoot with some dollar amount, and it sort of overwhelms like the scope of what a person thinks they have to go do. So finding that sweet spot of what is the financial support or the service kind of in-kind service support that could be helpful would be a really interesting conversation.
And I just want to add, I feel like there's some nuance in financial support could go to different folks here, right? So the contribution project that we've done at Cornell is money directly to, our youth, to the college students making these contributions. Working through youth programs, there may need to be financial supports for staff time or mentoring time that would make this actually feasible. So I think I'll just name that I'm curious to hear from folks, like what's an amount of money that could help a young person accomplish a contribution? And that to me is a little separate from then what does it look like to support a program leader in helping manage that?
As people are thinking about a dollar amount or the kinds of levels of support that needed, I want to respond. I see to June Mead's question. Would this be an opportunity for Pride scholars to connect directly with 4-H projects or programs to give recognition to the youth contribution or community projects? I absolutely think it could be. There's a couple of forcing functions that could be set up pretty easily to enable that sort of relationship. Our scholars, we want them to already have interactions with 4-H and youth participants in 4-H. But all of the Pride scholars are well versed in what the contribution project is now. And so they very well themselves have participated in the contribution project or could play a role where they're sort of showing up and explaining what the sort of scope of this could be and helping to help even younger people understand what the shape of a contribution might actually look like. So that would be a wonderful way to connect Pride scholars with what youth in 4-H may be doing.
Can I respond to Kristen's question about the dollar amount?
Sure.
So
Please.
One thing working on this that I've been super interested in, because I've had the same question as far as, sorry, my cat is trying to steal the show. I've had the same question as far as like what dollar amount would suffice, like where could we see the optimal effectiveness? And one thing I've noticed, especially being in like the focus groups afterwards, or just speaking to the contributors in the showcase, is that a lot of them unprompted would tell me that like this was kind of just like, this was the starting point, and they're still looking at ways to actively support their contributions or their projects like moving forward. So in a way, it gave me a bit of solace knowing that, okay, so it's not necessarily the money that is the driving force. Like once they're out of money, they say, okay, I can't contribute anymore. It's kind of like a combination of the support that they feel like they got, kind of like the this is a good idea from the lottery that we ran, but also just them starting to do it makes them say, okay, I can actually keep doing this going forward. Like they don't really seem to worry about the money. It's more so like, I want to keep this going. I'm just thinking about different iterations of what this might look like in the future.
Thank you for that, Chris, that reflection of what kind of a construal thing. And it actually prompts me to think about some of the other points here in the chat about one, how contribution might fit into existing programs, and how to prevent it from being disruptive or stretch further even capacity of programs. One insight that I talked about, but I want to try to bring back here is sometimes this could be a potential to really try to think about the construal of what counts as a contribution. My suspicion is that in 4-H, for example, many youth are contributing. That might not be the framework of how they understand what they're doing. That might not be a conversation, explicit conversation that's being had. But in the contribution project, there are a number of projects that are essentially something that a person or team is already doing. And this is a framework to think about it as a contribution. And that might create an inroad to engage with young people, like what makes it a contribution to you? And when young people, it may open up a conversation. So one, the ask here to one of the questions in the chat, the ask here is definitely not to outsource this to people who are already really busy and stretched. It's for partnership. I think we have a team and an organization here on campus that could do a lot of the administration of the contribution project. But it also then might be if there were, the goal would be that the learnings would be an opportunity for practitioners or educators. Like, would you really want to talk with young people about their contributions and engage them sort of explicitly in that way? And my guess is there's a lot of this already happening. And I saw another point about what if young people didn't want to do it? There's a lot of people who don't want to contribute here at Cornell. That like the goal isn't to make everybody a contributor, but if it is a need and young people want to, quite literally putting our money where our mouth is to say that we want to be a part of creating these opportunities where they exist and helping young people who might be already in this headspace or enactment space kind of get credit for that interest and for that enactment by naming it as a contribution that was valuable to them. So we don't want to be disruptive. The ask here is for partnership. If there was a team here at Cornell that could partner with you to help administer this, we would love to explore that. So let me just round it out in this way, and not to, if there's still questions, by all means, email us, let us know in Pride. But the ask is active. We have a team that seems poised to administer the contribution project. We've done it a number of times now. I think we have an understanding of what it looks like here on campus. But if this topic today or in the future resonates with you and it's something that you would like to talk more about, by all means reach out. I think we have a collection of people here who have a desire to learn, what does contribution look like in the lives of young people? And if the science is true, right? If this is an opportunity for young people to explore and to learn in ways that are positive, not just for the world around them, but for them themselves, then these kinds of opportunities might be really worth thinking through. And it would be great to connect with you and to hear how we might fashion a contribution project that suits and fits your needs, and one that would resonate for something that you'd want to do with it. You want to make something of it in your program or organization. I might just turn it over to Kristen or to Esther or Chris, anybody who's a part of this may have a thought that you want to share as well.
Well, I know we're coming up on the end of time. So one, thank you, Tony, for the presentation. Yep. And, I also appreciate you sharing this work also on behalf of Pride, because I would love for us to figure out ways to connect these ideas to 4-H or other relevant youth programs. I know not everyone in the room with us is from a 4-H setting, but that's certainly our frequent partner in Pride. So I hope we can continue this conversation about ways to move forward and what would be a good fit